welcome to Side Project. Today I've got John Drexler on, co-founder of Thunk. As of late, a major side projector, I would call you. You got a couple irons in the fire here. How you doing, John?
Super side projector.
Super side projector.
I know. I feel like a lot of the code that I actually write on a daily basis is like in toy projects that are not real.
But that's the most fun.
Yeah, it's definitely the most fun rather than writing some like wild classes to parse some like data for some arcane API on some client project.
Which is all of client work.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You just summed it up in a sentence. Good for you.
Yeah,
that was amazing.
Right, yeah. You get
succinct.
Paid like pretty decent money to do that full time.
Yeah, for sure. So right now I'm most focused on your game work. You're trying to bring so you've been making games for a long time, right? So you've been making physical games for a long time, I should say. And now you're kind of bringing them online. The latest being Elephant in the Room, which is very good. How many games have you actually brought online, or how many online games have you made, like website games?
Well, there's always the distinguishing thing of like things that are like live and available and have a public link, and things that don't. So like,
okay, let's break it down. How many don't? Let's start there.
Like 5.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's like, rest assured, it's like this thing that I'm always thinking about, which is like in terms of just like reputation and like social capital that you have with waving your hands and jumping up and down on the internet and going, look at my thing, please look at my thing, please look at my thing. And then and then in some cases, please give me money. It's like,
right.
I try to be extremely selective with those things. And so I work on like 10 times as much stuff as I release. And if I'm waving my hands, it means like, I actually think this is really good. And if I'm asking for money, then I'm like, this is
extraordinary. Yeah. This is gonna blow your mind. Okay, so how many have made it actually to a public link?
Basically, like 2 ever.
Okay.
And one of them is now defunct.
Okay. Or defunct, depending on how you want to. So you and Daniel made Pyramid Scheme, which was essentially an online game for all intents and purposes.
Yeah.
Which,
okay, I guess that's a third. Sorry, yeah, I didn't really think of that.
So you got 3.
Okay, yeah, that's right.
So one of them is no longer just because you said, we're done here, this doesn't live up to my standards anymore. Like, what was the reason for taking it off?
Yeah, it basically was like, the short version is I gave a whole talk at PHP NYC, which was an event that is run by my friend Joe Tannenbaum. And
don't know him, never heard of him.
Yeah, never heard of him. It sounds like a real chump.
Not familiar with that idiot.
But basically, we spent years building this thing. We built it with technology that we don't use anymore. We used it with Spotsy event sourcing package. Right. It is like, the old Caleb Porzio, he said, legacy code is any code you resent. The entire code base is legacy code. And it's like, there was a point where I was like, maybe I'll go back. It's also like kind of a huge game.
Yeah.
It was like, it really ballooned out into a lot. But it is the thing that got me into writing code. And so...
Okay.
This is a very special place.
Pecking order? Is that what it's called?
Order, yeah.
If you want to see him talk about this, there's a YouTube video called Stone Soup, which is great, and you should go check it out. John Drexler, Stone Soup.
I will not rehash the whole story. It basically, that talk goes through like how we made it, why it was so special for us, and then also why I decided to kill it. And the thing that is now interesting is 2 of the main people I worked on that with are people who we're talking about making a new game that's like a radically simplified version of it that is like meant to be played in person and is flexible for different player counts and is not so scary to newcomers. So we're trying to sort of chip away and find just like the gem at the center of pecking order and make a game out of just the gem.
That's cool.
And we'll see how it goes.
Nice. Yeah.
I was playing Elephant in the Room earlier today. You have so many elements that are deceivingly hard, such as sound effects, a bot player, animation. Like it feels really polished. It's very impressive.
Thank you.
Can we talk about the stack journey? Because I think if I remember correctly, you were posting about that you changed stacks. Like you started with one, you changed stacks. So what was that evolution? And then where did you land? And like what were the tough bits? What were the parts that tripped you up?
Yeah, it's been a journey, and I actually think it's like very interesting. It was like it's been, you could mark my journey as a programmer by the iterations of this game. So
actually, let's back up and say, what is Elephant in the Room? Do you want to just describe the mechanics of the game?
Yep. The quickest way you can kind of picture it in your mind is, imagine if you were playing Connect 4 and the pieces could move around. So
wow, perfect.
I was thinking about game ideas like in 2018 maybe, and was thinking about, I was like, Connect 4 is a good, like, simple abstract concept that everyone gets intuitively. But the thing that's not interesting about it to me is that it's static. Once you play a piece, it is always where you played it. And it would be how interesting if you could move rows or columns of pieces to like go, because then that's like, now that's a much broader space to think about. And so there's like a lot more chances to outwit your opponent.
Yeah.
And so Elephant in the Room is a simple 4x4 grid. You take turns sliding tiles onto the grid. The elephant blocks movement, so you get to play a tile and then move the elephant. And if you manage to construct the shape, sometimes it's a line, sometimes it's a square, there are other shapes as well, you win the game immediately. And so you know, the general experience when people start playing it is they're like, well, that seems too easy. And then their opponent starts pushing their pieces around and they're like, oh, this is like kind of hard to think about, which is kind of like right in that sweet spot of an abstract game that you want to hit.
As I was playing, I was like, I wonder what the good strategy is. Like, you know when as a kid you're playing like tic-tac-toe and you learn about putting one in each corner so you have multiple ways of, you know what I'm saying? Like there was that unlock that was like, oh, if I do this, I can basically win like every time if I can get that like in 3 different corners. And it feels like there's something analogous here where there's a strategy where if you place a couple to give yourself several opportunities as things shift around, but then it does shift around and the elephant is sort of like the X factor of, well, it's not always going to work out that way because you can't always shift in the way you want to. I don't know. Do you have strategies at this point that are a little bit tried and true?
Here's a quick confession. I'm not that good at games, and
the podcast. We're done.
I'm way better at designing games than I am at playing them.
Fascinating.
And people laugh at me all the time when we're testing my games because I will make like catastrophic blunders in almost every game I play. And like,
I kind of love that. I think it actually makes sense at some level that maybe you're just thinking about maybe the mechanics of the game more than you are about like actually playing a game on any given.
That's part of it too. I mean, we'll go with that. I mean, it is true that whenever we're testing the game, I am like thinking about it like a designer, and I'm thinking, is this specific thing working? What do I want to change next time? So like, I am very preoccupied when I'm testing, but also like even when I play, like, I don't know, I have played a lot of games, and I will introduce Lindsay, my fiance, to games, and she's like she didn't grow up as a big gamer, and she'll like frequently beat me in stuff that she's never played, and I'm just like, and I do think some people just have like game intuition where they're just like, they pick something up and they just get it.
My wife is that person as well. She demolishes me on a regular basis. Doesn't really matter what the game is. She just latches on. She's like, oh, I get it. Boop, boop, boop. And just understands like the common sense to her moves to make. And she's always like 4 steps ahead of me. I don't know how it works, but like she definitely has that.
But to answer the question, like, I have strategies that work for me. And like, if I'm playing a game, like Daniel hadn't played much. And like, right when I launched it, we played like 10 games online, and like, I beat him like 9 out of 10 times. Like, I've played the game so much now that I have some things that work really well. If you want to know how I play, the bot is basically programmed to think exactly like I think, but it doesn't make mistakes. And so if you play against the bot is like generally doing what I would do.
Sort of the perfect version of you if you were always on. Yeah.
Yeah. And so then what's interesting is like a bunch of people played the game right when I launched it, and several people texted me and they were like, the bot's too hard because it doesn't make mistakes. But then a handful of people texted me, like Jake Bathman. You know, Jake Bathman is a true gamer, and he messaged me and was like, is this bot right? I keep on beating it on the first try. I'm like, well, you might have intuited something about my game that I don't understand myself.
I beat the bot today. I beat it today. I was very proud of myself. But it didn't look good for a minute, I'll be honest. Yeah. Like, there was a minute where I was like, oh, the bot's got my number, and then I
think that the secret strategy to beat the bot is the game dramatically changes in the end game when you have to conserve tiles. Because if you run out of tiles, you lose your turn, which almost certainly means you're going to lose the game. And so if you're playing against somebody who's equally skilled with you, you'll very likely reach a point where one of you only has one tile left. And then the game significantly shifts because you have to be thinking, I need to make a good move, but also I should probably push one of my own tiles off the board so I can have another tile.
You got to reclaim a little bit, yeah.
And that like third act like dramatically shifts the strategy. And the bot is like not very good at those decisions. So if you want to beat the bot, just like wait them out.
Yeah, just keep shuffling things around the board until they have no tiles. That's good advice. So, okay, so now we understand what the basic mechanics of the game are. You started with what stack? You started with inertia, right?
Well, so way back when it was the very, very first learned how to write code, I did this as just like a Livewire CRUD app, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And it was hilarious because all of the game logic was just in this one Livewire component called board, and it was like I knew nothing about how to write code, so I was just like, I don't know where else to put this. I'm going to put it here, like
the fattest controller you've ever seen.
And also it was ridiculous. Like every space on the board was like a row in the database. It was like insanity. It was so bad. It was literally like, here's somebody who
listen. Where else are you gonna start? Like, come on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it was exciting because it actually did work. It was like ugly, slow. The code was like hilarious, but like you could log in and play. And so I was like, dope. Oh, I can make stuff. Now I can like get better at making stuff, So eventually I came back and I said, naively what I said like 6 months ago was the thing that it's missing is animation. And that is true because, when you play a tile, if you don't animate it at all, you just like click a button and then you see the thing appear, and it's not intuitive that the tile was like sliding onto the board.
It's hard to tell like what just happened. Like you have to sort of like fill in the blanks a little bit. Yeah, I totally see that. Yeah.
So I was like, okay, so it is true. Like that is an assumption that is correct, which is that like you need to have animation, but that was only part of the story. So what I did was I was like, maybe I'll use this as my chance. I've heard like Inertia 2.0 is coming. Inertia is really cool. I will use this as my chance to like go get good at React. And I talked to some people and was like, I asked Twitter about like, what should I use? And people were like, oh, Framer Motion is really cool. It's really powerful. And I went and looked at it. Framer Motion is really cool and really powerful.
It is, yeah.
And, like I had a lot of fun playing with it. Like, it seems like you could do some really radical stuff with it. And there was one response that I didn't look at very carefully from this guy named Connor Lindsay, who I've gotten to know a little bit since then, who sent me this blog post that was like, Framer Motion is really cool, but did you know that pretty much everything Framer Motion can do, CSS can do now? And I was like, really? And I kind of ignored it. And
go on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so then I went and built it as like this React app. And this is where I got into the second, or not the second, or maybe the third or fourth, like revelation about this was that I needed the front end to know everything about the game. And the reason is when you click a button or you say, go play this tile, we need to animate the entire board state and the slide, and maybe immediately upon playing that tile, you actually won. Mm-hmm. We need to animate the tile moving immediately, which means we need to know how tiles move. We need to know what's on the board. We need to know the whole history of moves. We also need to know, like, how do you calculate victory condition? Does Joe have victory condition? We need to know all of that before we even get a response from the server, right? Because if we wait until we get a response from the server, there's going to be some kind of delay. And even if it's a half-second delay, it feels really bad.
Yeah, it feels bad. Yep.
So that was the part that I think I had not wrapped my head around. I was like, well, if you have animations, it's really cool. But I had built, because of the game, I'm going to talk about pecking order first. When you think about pecking order, you don't need a lot of like real-time stuff. It's a social game. I won't go all the way into it, but like similar with Pyramid Scheme, like you vote, you do stuff, and then like, it can like load the scoreboard after you vote or whatever. But like, there's not a lot of real-time stuff. You can kind of treat it like
pretty purposely asynchronous because you were playing when you had time, basically.
Yeah. And so like, that's everything that I had built to date. And so the way that the way that game like engines work in my head is I use verbs. They're all event sourced and they're all on the server, right? And like the server does need to know game logic, but it's like that's where I've always started. Is I just say like, well, what's the game logic? Let's start building out a cool world in event sourcing and build a backend that can like accommodate all this cool future stuff and works and knows everything and has really good exception handling and whatever. Once I started really, I'm like, how do I really polish elephant in the room? It's like, well, actually, all the polish has nothing to do with the server. I actually need to know everything in the client. And so not only do I need to do animation there, in order to intelligently do animations, the client basically needs to know everything about how the game works, even before we can't rely on the server, basically. And so that was like a really interesting revelation for me. And I was like, had a bunch of really interesting conversations with Daniel about that, where I was like, this is weird. Like if you want a super responsive thing in the browser or just in the client in general, it's like the client has to know everything, but also the server has to know everything. And it's like, this is why people are writing Next.js apps. Okay.
I didn't want to say it, but there we are.
And it was like, it was cool to like push that as far as I could to get to that point where I was like, I think I just like understood the rationale for Next.js from first principles, and like I get it. Like there's a reason people want to do it, and like maybe that would be a fun little toy to build, is like, is to do it, build something in Next.js just to learn how it all works. I don't want to use it for real, but like just, I don't know, sounds kind of fun.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the power of writing the same language front end, back end, and a language that natively runs in the browser, it's very powerful. It's like the logic sharing, everything about that is amazing. It's probably one of the few shortcomings that we have as like Laravel developers, is that we can't truly share logic and have that sort of like super low latency interactions in that way, just because of that. But so you said inertia is not it. What was next in the? Oh, not yet.
It wasn't that. I mean, yeah. And it wasn't that it wasn't it. It's that so that's where I realized I ran into a problem with Framer, and it was not really a problem with Framer. It was a problem with how I had built it. And so I was staring down the barrel of like a big refactor, because I was trying, I don't know if this is right. I don't know if I know enough to say that this was the problem, but I think I was thinking about it wrong, where I was doing like Framer stuff at like a individual component level, a component being like a tile or the elephant itself. And like all of these like instances of Framer were like bumping into each other, and it was getting weird and bad. And I was like, oh, I think this is not how you're supposed to do it. So I was like, okay,
I can see that.
Time for me to like run it back and like think very differently about this. And it was at that point that I revisited that blog post that Connor sent. And honestly, without even trying it, I went into Cursor, which I had just started using Cursor for the first time. And I just made a blade component that had like nothing. It wasn't connected to Livewire. It wasn't doing anything. But I was just like, hey, Cursor, make me a grid, 4x4 grid with a bunch of like colorful tiles on it. And when I press a button, they all slide to different positions, and only do this using Tailwind classes. And it wrote
and your mind exploded just right then.
It wrote like 15 lines of code, and it was like more beautiful than anything I had made. And I was like, no,
I've wasted so much of my life.
So it was really cool, because it was like there was all this stuff I just didn't know. And honestly, doing it with Cursor was like super fun.
Yeah.
Because I have it helped me also develop some strong principles about how I use AI, because I was like, I'm definitely not merging anything into this project that I don't totally understand. Because like I will not be like owning and maintaining code that I don't understand.
Yeah. That's a good starting point.
Yeah. But like I kept on like going back, and like a lot of what it wrote like kind of didn't work, but it like almost worked. And it was really interesting. So I literally just like went from that to like I was like, okay, well now I can go back into a world that I'm comfortable in. And I went back to Livewire. And what was interesting was then I was, because I had that inertia experience, I felt like I had a better intuition of like being choosy about like when I talk to the server and why and what information I'm passing back and forth. And I introduced reverb as well. I guess I probably had reverb already for the inertia one, but that was cool to use reverb for WebSocket stuff.
So I know that there's also like obviously a multiplayer element where you can play in real time against people on the internet, but are you using that like does reverb come into play with the bot as well? Like
the bot's all happening on the server. And so I need to like basically like after you from your client, you make a move and your turn ends when you play the elephant. You play the elephant and then the server sees that you played the elephant and is like immediately do a bot move, and at the end of the bot move, inform the client that new stuff has happened.
So it is still you still have WebSockets involved there as well?
Yeah.
Sure. Okay. Cool.
And the bot is what the bot is on the back end is just another player. So all the WebSocket stuff is indifferent as to whether your opponent is a bot or a human.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
And that was really cool. One of the things I realized was that like my state, I actually might do it differently again if I were to start over from scratch. I mean, first of all, if I were to start over from scratch, I would actually start with literally just the client, and I would make the client really smart and happy and clean and good. And then I would build out my server probably, like, which feels crazy, but in retrospect, I think that's actually smarter.
You're butting up against like local first almost. Like you're basically giving the client all the power and then just kind of making sure the server just serves as sort of like a rectifier. It's like, okay, does all this make sense? And then like it is the source of truth ultimately, but the client is the smartest person in the room at that point. Like for the course of gameplay, yeah.
Will King, who's building some like really crazy stuff with React right now.
Yeah.
He's like building a video game in the browser, and it looks like it's crazy what he's doing. But he's a great developer. So he was like, from the beginning, he was like, I remember he tweeted early on, he was like, I'm pretty sure the approach here is like super smart client, probably kind of dumb server. And I was like, what are you talking about? And then like, and then getting into even just this like simple little game, I was like, that is exactly what I would do if I was starting over.
Dear William King, I apologize for my previous comments.
I was like, you idiot, what are you thinking?
I would like to retract my statements from September 14th.
But what I was going to say is that part of the reason I would also consider the interesting thing that's weird about it is that like I actually might not even use Livewire in the future, because I actually got to this point where that big blade component that is like the whole game, which is not good. It should be broken up, but it was easier to have it all in one file for me. So that component, I'm wire ignoring the whole thing, because the state of like, if you think about like where every tile is like got there as a result of like a bunch of events happening. And so like the state of it should be correct, but it's also like kind of fragile. And so if you just start like willy-nilly updating things and being like, we just got a new request from Livewire. We just did a new request to Livewire because something happened. And now like Livewire's like sending up, like shoving data up into the component. Things kept on breaking and I didn't expect them to, because I was like, I had built this fragile little world in the client, and I was like, I need the sledgehammer of Livewire to not hit my fragile little world.
Yeah.
And so I ended up wire ignoring everything and then specifying exactly like when Livewire hears something from Reverb or anything like that, it in a very surgical way, like emits an event to Livewire still is probably the right solution, but like I'm not automatically like updating anything. It's like extremely meticulous. Like, okay, we saw that Joe played a thing on the server. Do we already know about that, or do we not already know about that? Like, what's the state of the world? Okay, animate this way. And so,
but you're still shooting information to the server as it goes, just to say like, hey, this happened, just like record it, just in case like they refresh the page or whatever, they lose the client state basically. Saying it that way, Livewire feels a little overblown. Like if you're gonna wire ignore 90% of it, at that point, like maybe just write some vanilla JavaScript or just Alpine. Really, would probably be fine.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But there were some niceties with how like Alpine receives those events from Livewire and stuff. Like there were some nice things in there.
Sure, of course.
It is interesting. Like literally, like it's this one Livewire component, and in the blade file, the entire thing, like the parent div is wire ignore. Like so, it's like it's so weird. Yeah, like what am I even doing here?
So ultimately, you ended up with a very smart client. It sounds like the client knows basically everything about the game.
Yeah.
Is that right? That's what we ended up with? Okay.
Yeah. And there is a bug in there somewhere. People occasionally send me screenshots that I cannot replicate where the client is wrong, but yeah.
That's rough. Yeah. So final result is we have Livewire being used, largely ignored. We have WebSockets. Once you settled on like, okay, this is the implementation, this is the stack, this is like how I'm choosing to do this, like what was there any tech or any decisions that were particularly tricky or like something that like took you a while in implementing the actual gameplay of it?
I think some of the hardest parts were figuring out like time. There's these like there's some hacky stuff in there with like timing, which is like if you I'm trying to even figure out how to articulate like if I like move a tile and then move the elephant really fast and like not wanting those two things to like collide. And so like I did introduce there's like a concept of like in the Alpine code that's like is animating is like a thing on the component, and like I try not to animate anything while that's true. And then there's like other stuff like in the same way, like if from reverb I find out that you like what I actually ended up doing was to ensure that I had control over that for animating your opponent's move. I basically ignore when you play the turn is like you play a tile and then you play the elephant. I basically ignore when you played the tile and I wait until you've played the elephant. And then I like can animate both of them in like a sequence that's like consistent with its timing.
Smart.
But then that introduced some other things where it was like, what if you have played a tile and then I refresh and then I like see your tile, but then you play the elephant. So then it like plays another tile and then my client is like confidently wrong. And so I had to introduce this other concept in Alpine, which is like known moves. And I'm like, because everything is like stored as a move. So I'm like, if I like when you load the page, it loads in the IDs of every move that it is aware of. And so like, if I ever tell it to animate a move and it's like, no, we actually already animated that move, it skips over it and jumps to the next one.
Smart.
So there was a bunch of that stuff that I was like, none of that was really in my mind when I started. And then as I did it, I was like, this is all working, but like it is clunky and weird. And bad, you know? So there was a lot of just like a substantial amount of the code in that component is like solving those little things that like if you looked at it, you're like, why are you doing a like set timeout for 700 milliseconds right there? I'm like, if you take it away, everything breaks, you know?
It was the evening of December 7th. I remember, so I built over the pandemic, I built a real-time card game like that you could play.
Yeah, you told me about that. I really want to see it.
In that, I ran into a bajillion, and I think I'm probably a better developer now than I was then, and I think I would probably build it an entirely different way. But I ran into like so many instances of like, okay, that just happened, but like everybody chill, we gotta like deal out these cards first, and then like it's like somebody won, but 5 things need to happen before that actually displays in that way, and like everybody's got to be in sync and on the same page, and then hopefully nobody refreshes, but if they do, we have to like resync this state and like play it back out again. It was so, I mean, first of all, I would definitely be building it with verbs behind the scenes, because like probably like your initial game, like I haven't looked at that code in forever, but it's probably horrific and like very large. But I remember so many of those instances where I was like setting weird timeouts and like, are we currently animating, and you know, are we in the process of doing X, because then just hold off and then do the next thing after that, and sequencing was really hard. And so yeah, I remember all of these problems, and yeah, it's tricky. It's hard to do these things, and I wonder if somebody's cracked it in such a would front end verbs like fix a lot of this stuff, because you could sort of like tap into events in the same way and then just like respond to those events with the correct animations.
I will not
confirm or deny that front end verbs is being built right now.
Literally very little is being built right now. We have a lot of clients. So I will not try to answer that, because I think I will like muddy it. But I will say this. There's been a bunch of like speculative conversation about what something like that could look like.
Yeah.
There was even a moment where like we didn't actually do any of this, but like I was showing something to Chris Morel, and he's like, what if like what if an event like could return like a blade component, and like what if like you could actually like return components and like tell them how to behave when like at the end of firing an event, and we kind of started going off into galaxy brain territory, and it was like, whoa. And Daniel's played a lot with like this whole, like, he's talked a bit about publicly like verbs commands stuff and like verbs Livewire integrations, where you're like, if you could imagine, I mean, this is a smaller case, but it's like, if you could imagine that like for every action that a user could take, suppose that there's an event that goes along with that. And in verbs, you validate and authorize each event. And so like, imagine you did like Command K to open up a command palette, and like what you see in that command palette is under the hood 5 events, some of which you are authorized and valid to take and some of which you are not. And it's like all of the code about those activities just lives in verbs, which is like so cool. And then your
really
validation
cool.
logic for like the front end and for the back end lives in one file, which is like really cool.
Yeah, that's pretty solid. That's pretty solid.
Anyway, I'm giving away his tricks here, but I think he's talked about that publicly. But like, that stuff does not exist yet. I mean, not like really for real. There's like little toy examples exist, but like, there's some cool stuff. There's some really cool stuff you could do.
That's awesome. To switch back to the game real quick, how hard was it to build the bot? Like, how hard was it to have the bot make decisions? Because I'm interested in that. And you also made it, I think, did you make it varying levels of difficult? Like, you could make it easy, medium, hard, or did you not end up going down that road?
It actually, it would be really easy for me to implement that. I didn't implement it. It's pretty easy to implement. Basically, it was surprisingly not that hard. And the reason that it's not that hard is because I was able to write it in a dumb way. And the reason I was able to write it in a dumb way is because there are not that many different things that the bot could do on a given turn. So if you think about it, on a given turn, you could make one of 16 choices. And then if the elephant is blocking a couple of those, you could make one of 14 choices, right? And also we have certainty about what the state of the board will be with all 14 of those choices, right? So it's like, you could play in the first column in the first row and down. You could play in the second column in the first row down. And we know exactly what the board will look like after each one of those. And so basically in verbs land, when it's time for the bot to take their move, you can just basically go, what are all the moves that they could make right now?
So you really play through them. You say, like, what do these all look like at the end state?
I have like an object or an array called like a hypothetical board, So it's like, here's the 14 hypothetical boards that will be generated by those 14 hypothetical moves. And then just a pretty simple little function to score those outcomes. So basically it's like, okay, well, if that outcome gives the bot a victory, that's like plus 1,000,000 points. If it gives me a victory, it's like minus 1,000,000 points. If it gives them check, basically like they are one move away from completing their shape, that's really good. But if it gives me check, if it gives them multiple checks, and then basically after all of those different things that matter a lot, then it basically just says maximize the number of my pieces that are together and touching each other, and subtract how many pieces of theirs are like connected and touching each other. It's like, if we don't have anything else to go on, just like make me have more pieces that are touching and in any combination. And so basically just is like, it's a knowable thing. And it takes like, a very short amount of time to compute that. It's just like, what's everything the bot could do, score it based on like what's good for them versus what's bad for them. And then put those in order and pick the first one.
It's much simpler than I would have imagined, but that makes sense when you spell it out that way. That makes a lot of sense. So if you were to do varying degrees of difficulty, you would sort of build in mistakes, basically, if it was like on easy mode.
What I would do, what I've played with before is right now. So let's say you get those 14 hypothetical boards, and then each board has a score, and then we just sort it based on the score. Right now, what it does is it just picks the top score. I think what you
which is theoretically like hardest mode, right? Like this is like exactly. A bot on hardest mode. Yeah,
exactly. So what you could do theoretically for like medium mode is like pick one of the first 3 in that array instead.
You could just lottery it basically.
Yeah. And easy mode, pick one of the first 5. You'd probably have to like play test it to figure out that would probably include some like big blunders. So I don't know, maybe medium mode is like pick one of the first 2, I don't know exactly.
Or it's like 80% of the time pick the best one, but 20% of the time pick, 2 or 3.
Yep.
Interesting.
It's also interesting because I got into some weird, like, so initially for a long time, the game was the only shape you need to make is a square, the 2x2 square. And it wasn't until very recently that I introduced the idea that, like, oh, it's randomized. Maybe you're trying to make a line, maybe you're trying to make a square. It's basically all the Tetris shapes that are in there. You'll notice that the bot is really good at the square, and it's not as good at the other. Like, my logic does not hold up as well with those other ones. And part of it is like, this is the ugliest and dumbest part of the code base, is like, when it's the most important thing that it has to do really is check to see if it has check, to see if it's one space away from winning. But like, actually enumerating every situation where you're one space away from winning is like more slippery than it seems.
It seems like, very slippery to me.
Yeah, because it's all you have to take into account. Like, what if, like, there's 3 pieces in the middle here? If there's a piece to the left of it that you could push it over, that's check. But if there's no piece right there, it isn't check. And so, like, nailing all those down. So, like, it was weird. I got in some testing in the final days where I was playing against the bot, like, a lot. And, like, the bot was on the non-square shapes. It was making some blunders. And I'd have to be like, okay, draw that board and, like, sit and think about it for a while. Like, why did the bot not comprehend why this was check? You know?
It's a lot of, like, extrapolation to, like, go a move or two ahead. It's that's hard. That's very hard. Yeah. On a more general note, just because the thought of, like, designing a game to me feels very daunting. It feels very intimidating to design a game.
Fun. You just do it.
Yeah, no, says the guy who, like, designs games. But, like, what is it about, like, I guess you can answer this one of two ways. What is it about a game that makes a game good, and or what makes a game immediately bad? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I remember you talking about, like, Kingmaker a lot, right? Like, there's, like, a sort of that's either good or bad, and, like, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? Like, what levers are you adjusting to make a game better than it was before, or what are the red flags when you're creating a game?
I do have a more intelligent answer than this, but the true answer as I'm developing is, like, it's purely vibes. It's like, do I like playing this game a lot? You know, and it's sometimes that's easy to articulate why, and sometimes it's really not easy to articulate why. But the only things that I'll ever release are things that I'm like, I straight up do not get tired of playing this, and I like it every time. That's the barometer, and it's like, okay, I just have to like it so much. That's pretty much it. Now, there are things you pay attention to, obviously, right? Like, I mean, there's some like classic blunders of, like, you know, the classic thing that people love to point out is like, oh, in Monopoly, you know who's going to win potentially 45 minutes before the game's over. That's obviously bad.
Yeah, that feels bad. Yep.
I had that one time, even with, like, a fairly sophisticated board game that I play. I actually don't like the, like, super complicated 5-hour board games. A lot of people like those. Somebody invited me over to play the Game of Thrones board game, and, like, it's, like, incredibly complicated. And in the first, like, 30 minutes, I had no idea what I was doing, and I, like, made a move that I didn't realize was stupid. And I was like, I turned to the guy next to me. I was like, I'm kind of blocked in here for, like, the rest of the game, and your army is just going to get stronger, and mine's just going to get weaker, huh? And he's like, yeah. I was like, so...
You're like, can I stop right now?
I'm just, like, writing this out for the next 5 hours. He's like, yeah, pretty much. Yeah. I was like, that's bad. Like, that's a big feel bad, you know? So, like...
And you had no, like, escape hatch? There was nothing you could do to, like, rectify that situation built in?
Maybe there was if I was better at that game, but it was my first time playing it, you know? So it was just like...
Gives you a bad taste.
Like that it's like, yeah, really, really bad feeling. Like, having, like, certainty about outcomes is, like, generally not very good. That's, like, kind of what a game is like, uncertainty of outcomes. And so, like, a game is not a story. And a story is a thing that has, like, a certain outcome. And a game is like an emergent machine. It's a machine which generates, like, emergent scenarios, and that is, like, much more interesting, you know, for me. I like stories too, but it's like a game should not be this, like, kind of, like, linear deterministic thing in my mind. Some people disagree, but
I think that makes sense.
There's a guy who I can't stop thinking about right now, whose name is Brian Moriarty, and he programmed these text-based adventures back in the 80s, and he's, like, maybe like the smartest person in like game thought stuff. Clearly I'm not. That's my description of the field, is game thought stuff. But he gives a lot of these talks about the relationship between games and stories, and they're very super interesting. I'll send you some links if you're interested. He is like,
yeah, I would love to read up on that.
I don't know, other things to watch out for. I think like one framework that I mean, you'll hear a lot of people say this in like game design 101 stuff, is like you start with the intended player experience and work backwards from there. But it's like this thing for you to point to over and over throughout the game development process. And
can you, break that down. Intended player experience being like in Monopoly, the intended player experience would be like, how do you summarize that?
Yeah,
this is so abstract to me. It's like hard to even
Well, here, how about
comprehend.
So you did the pyramid scheme, right? So like we can start with that, because that was one where like we knew exactly what we wanted the experience to be, and it's actually good for it to be pretty abstract, because then that's like it's not tied to a specific mechanic.
Okay.
But like for that one, it was like, okay, so at Laracon we're gonna have 1,500 people in the room, and in this loud room, I need to be able to come up and get in your ear and yell, hey, there's a game going on for $1,500 and here's how it works, and have to explain that to you in about one sentence. You need to instantly find it like intriguing and kind of obvious. Like, I get how that works. I could see how me or one of my friends would win. Like, I see why that's interesting. It's like it's so clear and sticky.
It's got to click quickly. Like the whole thing has got to click quickly,
without you using any brain power on it. And then throughout the game, the player experience is like, it's something you can check in on. It's not something you need to do every hour. It's probably good if you check in on it once an hour, but you don't have to. Also, like, if you quit, it's not a big deal. In fact, we built quitting into the game, and we made quitting interesting. So it's like, when you decide you're done, that's not a sad moment. That's an exciting moment. We wanted it to be something where you have a strong reason to go invite your friends, which in this case, you win the game by working with your friends. We wanted it to have this kind of viral effect. And we wanted it all to ramp up to this big finale where like one person gets this bag of money. Like, we were picturing just this scene of like a bunch of people gathered around and you hand a big bag of money to somebody. So like, that's pretty abstract, because that says nothing about the rules. That says nothing about the tech stack. That says nothing about anything, but it's almost like just painting this picture of like, what do you want here? And it was like, that is what we wanted. And we had total clarity about that. And you could write it down in like 4 bullet points, you know?
And it's your sort of, so then that ends up just being the guiding star of like, as you're creating the game, you say, is this still happening? Is this still the end result? Is this still the experience? That's smart. That's smart.
And part of that, like, I would say one of the biggest ones for me, I had to make a bunch of things before I started to understand like what is consistent about that for me across games. And in pretty much every game that I make, it's always, Elephant in the Room is actually kind of an anomaly. It's the game of mine that feels the least like a game that I would have made. But like in all the other games that I make, it's like direct competition. I don't make it really anything that's like single player. And it is, there's ample opportunity for you to like put a few pieces together and feel like a genius, and to like mess with people. And so like, that was part of the other big part of the player experience with Pyramid Scheme, is like the rules like are open for you to like mess around and play. Like, you could really play with those rules. It's open to being like, there's no rules about like, you can't cajole people and offer them money to quit early and all this stuff. So it's like, there's this big open creative field. And in the same way, like Colossi or this new board game that I'm working on, like, we just hand you a bunch of tools and then we're like, have fun, you know? And it's like, if you can take a second to like look at the tools available to you and string them together, you can go like, you have these moments where you go like, wait, does this really work? That's crazy. I can't imagine. Oh, you can actually do this. That is basically like the fundamental player experience I want people to have over and over and over.
And I will say that specifically with Colossi, right? Not Colossi. I always say Colossi in my brain. Colossi. So Colossi is a physical game that you made. And my wife and I played it, and that was the constant experience, was like, oh, you can do that. Oh, it was just constantly going like, oh. And that was satisfying. It was something, it was like, it felt like it was like morphing in front of us, like as you played the game a little bit. And then I got a little, I mean, I won the first
skirmish. Yeah. Like, oh no, it's so fun.
Because I think she saw that mechanic. She's like, oh, almost nothing is as presented, because as soon as you get into a skirmish, it changes virtually constantly depending on the gameplay. So it was just delightful and fun, and it's wonderful.
Well, there's another. I'll talk about this all day. By the way, I know. I'm sure you have work to do. So you cut me.
We'll wrap it up soon.
But like another. So when you ask a question about sort of like things that you watch out for, I didn't give a very direct answer. Partly because I think when people talk about like games as like a category, it's almost as broad as talking about like writing. You know, and it's like, well, what are the general principles of writing? It's like, well, I don't know. What are we writing? You know,
sure.
And so I think I like to think in terms of like spectrums or spectra. Is that the plural? And
there are no rules. There are
no rules.
A lawless podcast. You can say whatever you want.
Careful. So like another spectrum that reminds me of, which is like another good framework for thinking about things, is like people talk about like strategy versus tactics. Strategy being like everything you do has like super long-term consequences that are very difficult to undo. And so if you are really smart strategically and you can like string together several smart things in a row over half of the game, you have like built up something that is like has sort of like had like compounding interest growth, you know, where it's like you've strung things together in a way that will like give you a massive upper hand against your opponents later on. And tactics is much more about like, what am I doing right now? What clever thing can I do right now? And you can think of games as being on that spectrum. So I don't know, something like the Game of Thrones game I was just describing would be far on the strategy side, where it's like you have the opportunity, if you know a lot about this game and you make 10 smart decisions in a row, to like really bludgeon your opponents. The things that I make try to be pretty forgiving in terms of strategy and lean very far in the direction of like, do something clever right now. Like you can probably dig yourself out of the hole later on if it doesn't work, but like you've got some cards in your hand that could probably do something clever. If you can't do anything that clever, like get out of there. And it's actually like you will be rewarded for leaving early because you get to keep more of your cards. But if you can do something clever, don't wait. Like do it right now.
Get the payoff.
Wow them, shoot off some fireworks, make them go, is that really what that card does? Oh my gosh. And then move on. And I lean pretty far in that direction. And I think it's partly because like in games, I'm really not good at like when I try to like really play chess, I have like a very difficult time envisioning like 2 moves into the future.
Yeah.
And so it's probably just a result of that. Like I enjoy much more just like, what are the 6 cards that I have right now? And is there something insane I can do with them?
I think that's a great note to end on. What are the 6 cards I have right now? And what's something insane I could do with them? I could also talk about this all day. I find this really fascinating. It's also like so far outside of my daily work, daily thought process. Like I certainly play games, but I've never thought about like making one in that way. And I think it's fascinating. It's just a fascinating thing to take up.
Well, happy to talk more anytime.
Yeah, I might have you back on.
Yeah.
Where can people find you? Where do you want people to find you? What do you want to? This is now we're in Plug City. Plug away.
You'll put these links in there, but I'm on Blue Sky, John Rudolph Drexler.
I'll put no links in. You got to tell them now. This is your opportunity.
You can also do just go to johnrudolphdrexler.com, which is I think has all of my links to everything. And you can find the games. I think you can find links to the Elephant game and to Colossi if you want to buy it, and keep up with stuff that I'm doing in the future. I don't know. I'm also on Instagram, LinkedIn, all the things. Letterboxd, follow me on Letterboxd. I think I have like 11 followers there reading my really good movie reviews.
John is I wouldn't even say movie, I would say a film fanatic. I imagine you have good taste. I have no actual idea, but it's your
no chance.
Impeccable taste. So if you are also a movie person,
my most recent...
So impeccable taste. I stand by that. Impeccable taste. Dude, a pleasure. Come back anytime. This was so fun. Thanks for coming on.
I should probably also say hire Thunk.
Hire Thunk. Thunk.dev, right? Thunk.dev.
Thunk.dev, yeah. We'll put that in
Okay.
there. Yeah.
Mega talented team led by 2 mega talents. You should definitely hire Thunk. Do it up.
Perfect.
All right. Catch you later,
Thanks,
bud.
Joe.